Winter 1777. The Continental Army arrives at Valley Forge, weary and worn. Snow blankets the valley, wind cuts through tattered coats, and fires barely warm frozen tents. Food is scarce, frostbite spreads, and disease claims more men than any. Battle. Whispers of desertion and betrayal echo through the camp, testing trust and loyalty. Amid the suffering, soldiers share what little they have, forming bonds stronger than fear. George Washington walks among them, inspiring discipline, hope, and perseverance. Each day is a struggle, yet each day shapes an army stronger, unified, and ready. Valley Forge is not just survival, it is the crucible of resilience and determination. As the last leaves fell from the trees and the cold winds swept across Pennsylvania, the Continental Army prepared for a winter that would test the limits of human endurance. In December 1777, General George Washington led his ragged troops to a flat open valley outside of Philadelphia, Valley Forge. The location seemed strategic, hidden enough from the British Army yet accessible for supply lines. But what awaited them was far more punishing than any battlefield they had faced. The soldiers, many barely in their 20s, arrived in tattered coats and worn-out shoes. The army was a patchwork of state militias, volunteers, and a few seasoned officers, all united under a cause yet divided by experience, expectation, and circumstance. They had endured skirmishes, losses, and the harsh march across Pennsylvania. But the reality of winter introduced a new kind of challenge, one that could break men without firing a single shot. Tents were erected hastily, often failing to provide protection against piercing winds. Fires were scarce, fuel even scarcer. Food rations dwindled to near nothing, with soldiers sharing handfuls of hardtack and the occasional portion of salted meat. Many reported hunger pains so intense that they dreamed of wild animals or imagined crops that never existed. Frostbite began its silent assault on fingers and toes, leaving men weak, their movements slowed, their spirits dampened. Despite the physical suffering, Washington moved among his troops daily, inspecting the lines, offering encouragement, and demonstrating the kind of stoic leadership that inspired loyalty. He knew that the survival of his army depended not just on food and shelter, but on discipline, morale, and belief in the cause of independence. Still, the task was monumental. The winter was brutal, and every day brought new struggles. Some soldiers whispered doubts, questioning whether they could survive the season, let alone win the war. The camp's atmosphere was a mix of resilience and despair. Groups huddled together, sharing what little warmth they could find, exchanging stories of home, loved ones, and the freedom they fought to secure. In some corners, desperation led to fights over rations. In others, camaraderie forged bonds stronger than any uniform could provide. The officers worked tirelessly to maintain order, aware that the Army's unity was as critical as its physical health. By the end of that first month, the soldiers of Valley Forge understood the scale of the challenge ahead. The winter promised no mercy, and the Army's survival depended on more than courage. It required endurance, trust, and a determination to hold the line against both nature and doubt. In that frozen valley, history was being written not in gunfire or battle plans, but in the quiet, relentless struggle of men facing the harshest winter of their lives. The cold at Valley Forge was more than a chill in the air. It was a relentless force that seeped into the bones of every soldier. By January, snow had blanketed the valley in thick, unyielding layers, and the wind whipped across the encampment with a biting, unrelenting fury. The tents that were supposed to shield the men from the elements now shivered and sagged under the weight of ice, and fires, scarce and fleeting, did little to stave off the bitter cold. Hunger gnawed at the army. As sharply as frostbite, the rations, already meager, were often spoiled or missing entirely. Soldiers would wake in the night to the emptiness of their stomachs, feeling a hollow ache that no words could fill. Some tried to hunt in the nearby woods, risking frostbite or injury, while others scavenged the camp for scraps of bread or a piece of salted meat. Every meal, or lack thereof, was a reminder of the fragility of life and the harsh reality of war beyond the battlefield. Yet it was not just the body that suffered. Morale began to crumble under the relentless pressure. Whispers of mutiny spread through the ranks, fueled by frustration and fear. "Why are we here?" soldiers asked. "Why do we starve while the British dine in Philadelphia?" These questions, left unanswered, grew louder in the empty, frozen nights. Officers tried to keep discipline, but even the best-intentioned commands often fell on ears dulled by hunger and despair. Despite the growing unease, small acts of resilience began to surface. Soldiers shared what little they had, splitting portions of hardtack or trading worn clothing to protect a comrade from frostbite. They worked together to repair tents, chop firewood, and build shelters that would withstand the merciless winds. These acts of solidarity, simple as they were, became lifelines in the frozen wilderness, fostering trust in one another when hope in the war seemed distant. General Washington walked the camp daily, his presence both a reassurance and a silent demand for perseverance. He understood that an army was more than its weapons. It was its spirit. He encouraged drills and exercises despite the snow, reinforcing discipline and keeping the soldiers' minds engaged. Letters from home were shared around fires, reminding men of the families they fought to protect, providing a fragile but crucial link to a world beyond the cold valley. As the weeks dragged on, survival became a daily victory. Each day the men endured hunger, frostbite, and exhaustion was a testament to their growing fortitude. The bonds they forged in adversity began to outshine the whispers of doubt. They were no longer just an army, they were a community, united, not by comfort or abundance, but by the shared struggle against nature's cruelty and the uncertain promise of freedom. In Valley Forge, the seeds of resilience were being planted. The men would emerge from the winter forever changed, their bodies scarred and their spirits tested, but their unity stronger than any storm that could come. By February, the bitter winter at Valley Forge had begun to take a serious toll on the soldiers' spirits. Hunger was no longer the only enemy. The endless cold, the gnawing fatigue, and the sense of isolation from home began to erode morale. Whispers of mutiny, once faint and uncertain, now carried weight. Men questioned not only their ability to survive, but also the purpose of their struggle. The dream of independence seemed distant, almost abstract, as they endured day after day of suffering. Some officers, unable to withstand the relentless pressure, began to abandon their posts. Rumors spread of men slipping away into the woods, deserting their units in hopes of returning home or finding food elsewhere. For the soldiers still loyal, this betrayal cut deeper than frostbite. They had already endured so much, and now the very people who were supposed to lead and inspire them were faltering. It was a quiet kind of despair, less about the cold or hunger and more about the uncertainty of leadership and the fragility of trust. Despite the despair, moments of courage and determination persisted. Groups of soldiers huddled together around meager fires, sharing what little warmth or food they had. They reminded one another why they had joined the cause, telling stories of towns burned, families oppressed, and the vision of a nation free from tyranny. These conversations, whispered in the shadow of tents and snow-covered trees, rekindled small sparks of hope. Washington, aware of the growing unrest, acted decisively. He addressed the soldiers directly, walking among them in the freezing winds, speaking not as a distant general, but as a man who shared in their hardships. He reinforced the importance of discipline and unity, reminding them that the suffering of winter would forge the army into a stronger, more resilient force. His presence, calm yet resolute, became a stabilizing force, a reminder that leadership mattered in times of crisis. Yet every day was a test of endurance. Frostbite, disease, and exhaustion claimed more men than any battle ever had. Each loss weighed heavily on the survivors, reinforcing the sense that Valley Forge was a battlefield, unlike any they had known. Still, amid the fear and uncertainty, the Continental Army endured. They learned that perseverance was not just a matter of courage, but of necessity. And while morale wavered, the bonds formed in shared suffering began to strengthen, laying the foundation for the resilience that would define them in the battles to come. As the winter of 1777 to 1778 deepened, the trials at Valley Forge escalated beyond the physical. The army, already battered by hunger and frost, now faced a subtler, more dangerous enemy, betrayal from within. Some officers, worn down by the relentless cold and the constant pressure of leadership, abandoned their posts, leaving units under the care of less experienced men. Desertion among the rank and file became increasingly common, as the promise of home and safety tempted those too weak or too disillusioned to endure. Rumors of plots and secret departures spread quickly, stoking anxiety and suspicion among the men who remained loyal. Soldiers whispered about comrades disappearing into the snowy woods under the cover of night, slipping away from their units to seek their own survival. For those who stayed, the sense of betrayal was as bitter as the frost. They had endured hardship together, shared meager rations, and fought for a common cause, and now some had turned their backs in the moment of greatest need. The psychological toll was immense. Soldiers questioned not only their leaders but themselves. Why risk life and limb for a cause that seemed abandoned by those who should guide them? Arguments flared over food and shelter, and discipline threatened to unravel in the harsh conditions. The army teetered on the brink of chaos, and Washington understood that one misstep could turn Valley Forge into a full-scale disaster. Yet, even amid betrayal, leadership and unity began to assert themselves. Washington and his remaining officers doubled their efforts, reinforcing order and emphasizing the importance of perseverance. Training drills, though exhausting in the freezing conditions, instilled a sense of purpose and built cohesion. Soldiers who might have felt abandoned now saw the steadfast commitment of their generals, and this inspired renewed loyalty. Small victories, an organized supply distribution, a successful patrol, or a well-drilled formation, were celebrated as signs of resilience. Among the rank and file, bonds strengthened between those who remained. Men shared blankets, clothing, and the little food available. Letters from home were treasured, and stories of comrades' bravery circulated as inspiration. Even as betrayal tested the army, it also highlighted the courage and loyalty of those who endured. The winter of Valley Forge was teaching harsh lessons. Leadership mattered, trust was fragile, and perseverance required both courage and compassion. By the end of February, the army had survived more than frostbite and starvation. It had survived human frailty. The betrayals of a few only underscored the commitment of the many, laying the groundwork for an army disciplined not just by command, but by shared struggle and mutual trust. In the frozen valley, a stronger, more resilient force was taking shape, ready to face the battles yet to come. As spring slowly crept into Valley Forge, the frozen landscape began to thaw, revealing not only the earth beneath the snow, but also the transformation within the Continental Army. The men who had endured hunger, frostbite, disease, and the shadow of betrayal now stood taller, stronger, and more disciplined than ever before. The winter had been merciless, yet it had forged something far more enduring than physical endurance. It had forged resilience, unity, and unwavering commitment to the cause of independence. The soldiers were no longer a disparate collection of volunteers and state militias. Under Washington's steady guidance, they had become a cohesive fighting force. Drills and training, once seen as arduous and exhausting in the bitter cold, had honed their skills and instilled a sense of pride. Each man now understood his role, not just as a soldier, but as part of a larger mission, one that transcended individual hardship or fear. Discipline and organization replaced despair, and the army began to radiate a quiet confidence that had been absent during the darkest months of winter. The lessons of betrayal and hardship were equally transformative. Men had witnessed the consequences of abandonment, but they had also witnessed extraordinary acts of loyalty and courage. Comrades shared what little they had, carried each other through illness and injury, and faced the harshest conditions without yielding. These experiences strengthened bonds that could not be broken by fear or adversity. The winter had separated the committed from the wavering, leaving a core of men and leaders whose dedication was absolute. Washington himself had emerged as a symbol of perseverance and moral fortitude. His presence, calm leadership, and personal endurance had inspired soldiers to push beyond their limits. He had proven that leadership was more than orders and strategy. It was about presence, empathy, and the ability to inspire hope when all seemed lost. The Army's survival through Valley Forge became a testament to the power of steadfast leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. By the time the Army left the frozen valley, they were changed in ways that went beyond the physical. They carried the scars of winter, but also a legacy of resilience, discipline, and unity. Valley Forge was remembered not for the suffering endured alone, but for the strength forged in adversity. The Army marched forward into future battles, transformed, confident, and ready to fight not just with weapons but with unbreakable resolve. Valley Forge became a symbol of hope and perseverance, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, human spirit, discipline, and unity could triumph. The winter had been cruel, but it had left behind something far more enduring, a legacy of resilience that would define the American fight for independence. Spring arrives at Valley Forge and the snow begins to melt. The soldiers, once starving and frozen, now stand disciplined and united. The winter tested their bodies, their courage, and their loyalty. George Washington's leadership inspired perseverance amid despair. Bonds formed in hardship become unbreakable, shaping a resilient army. Valley Forge was more than survival. It was a crucible of strength. The Continental Army leaves transformed, ready to fight for freedom. Their endurance becomes a lasting legacy of courage and unity.